Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Iain Rob Wright. Hi Iain.
Hi Joanna, thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it's great for you to be here. So just a little introduction. Iain is the best-selling British author of over 20 horror novels in a number of subgenres, including the apocalyptic novels The Final Winter and The Gates. And we went full-time as indies around the same time, although we've never met, which is kind of crazy in person. But just start out, tell us a bit more about you and how you got into writing.
I've always sort of enjoyed writing. I think that's true of most authors or hobbyists or whatever. We enjoy the act of writing. So, even as a child at school, I always enjoyed English and writing little stories and things. So I always had that desire in me. As for how I, got into being an actual author, I went almost completely the indie route, and that was basically out of desperation to start earning money from my work, because I'd been doing sales for 5 or 6 years in the phone industry, and I was really unhappy and getting worse and worse with sort of not enjoying the job. And eventually one day I just had enough and I walked out on a job. I was working for the Three Network at the time. So I just completely walked out, but I'd had this book I'd been writing in my spare time just as a hobby, and I had the same dream of one day I'm going to get an agent and be published, and they had the artist and writer's handbook like everybody did back then. But I also knew, it's a bit of a lottery win. It isn't an easy thing, and it was in a time when you'd say, "Oh, I want to be a writer one day," and people just go, "Yeah, okay, good luck with that." But I was desperate, so I had my partner at the time, who's now's my wife. She wasn't very happy. I just walked out on my job, but I promised her, I've got this book, and I'm going to get an agent and all this. And I started researching agents, and somehow I must have stumbled across KDP. And this was in 2011. It was in the May. So I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a great success. Wonderful. This is all I need to never have to go back to working in phones. Like, completely deluding myself at the time. But I published it, and it started to make a little bit of money. And I was like, oh, that's nice. So my partner said, look, I'll give you 6 months. If you can replace the income you were making in sales, then, that's great. Stay at home. And at the time, I was kind of half paying my way by being an at-home guy, doing all the washing and the cleaning to try and, make myself useful, and just banking on this book. And in month 6 exactly, which was the deadline, it made the exact same amount I'd been making in sales in month 6. So it did exactly, what I'd hoped it would do. And it was like winning the lottery, because I didn't do anything proactive. I put it out there, went on Facebook. I didn't even have a Facebook up until that point. Just shouted about it a bit, and and it took off, and I was earning thousands of pounds a month from this one book, and that was in 2011. And I think, in hindsight now, I was so lucky that it was that point in time that I needed that break, because if I was in that situation now and had one book and just wanted to break into the industry and make a living, it's just so difficult now, and there's so many millions of ebooks that just weren't there in 2011. So I'm so blessed for the timing, and it is really difficult now to have that same sort of overnight success, but it is still possible. But it's much more of a long-term sort of business now that you need to set up to make it in self-publishing. Whereas there, to be honest, I was blessed and really lucky. As I'm sure you found the earlier days were a little bit easier going. And you didn't have to sort of swim quite so hard to stay afloat. But
I think,
yeah.
I mean, maybe that's true in any industry, and we don't want to make anyone listening feel bad if they're just starting.
Yeah.
There's opportunity at any point. And also, I think those of us, whenever you're starting something new, you've also got energy that you don't necessarily have later.
Yeah, no, there's so many different things I have to do now. Whereas in 2011, it was just pure. It was just, I've written a book and I want to sell it, and now it's so many other things. There's still guys that I see kind of getting success really fast, but there's no kind of easy wins now, I think. And I like the fact that self-publishing, it's become a little bit more mature and serious, and the people that are going to make it are the ones that deserve it and work hard and work smart. Some of the ones that were kind of chances or had some success and didn't necessarily deserve, they've kind of fallen by the wayside a bit now. So I suppose it's matured like any other business, that the success is going to go to those who work hard and work smart.
Yeah, which is a good news for everyone because
Yeah,
those people are listening to this show. So we're going to circle back to what you're doing now to be continually successful. But let's just wind it back to horror, because I also think that you perhaps were more visible in 2011 because the horror niche was not so busy as it is now. I mean, horror has really taken off. So let's
yeah,
just start by a lot of people put horror in the kind of slasher gore category and forget that it's a very broad church.
yeah.
So just give us an idea about, what goes into horror at this point in time, and what type of subgenres do you personally write in?
I never really go into a horror novel with with horrific thoughts. It's more something of hope. It's very much like I've got these characters in a really desperate situation, and I think about how they're going to come out at the end of it, stronger. And I think a lot of people kind of look down on horror as exploitative and a little bit lowbrow. But I think horror is one of the most hopeful genres because it's all about burying your characters in unsurmountable odds, and then the human condition, and the endeavor of your characters gets them through to the end, and they come out a bit stronger. And whether it's they defeat some natural crisis, Mother Nature turning on them, and the world ending, or whether it's a killer in the woods, it's all about finding the inner strength of humanity. And I think that puts hope and strength onto the reader by showing them what people can achieve. And I think horror is one of the most ancient genres, and I think it should get more respect than it does, because I think it's very much the closest genre to what it is to be human. And whenever I write a horror novel, it's always the characters that are strongest in my mind rather than the villain or the scene, the horror. It's all about what I want to bring out of these characters and the adversity they face. So I find it a really uplifting genre to write in, and people would always expect me to be really I'm wearing black now, but usually I'm a happy person. My favorite place in the world is Disney World. I love being at home with my kids. My office is covered in Disney. There's no Freddy Krueger on the wall or anything like that. And I'm not a depressing person at all, because I find horror is a really nice place to kind of exist, because it's all about triumph and hope and strength. It's not about any of the bad things in humanity.
Yeah,
So
I'm definitely with you there, and it's funny. I love reading horror. I read a lot of horror, and I feel that it's about eventually something good will triumph over evil in most
yeah,
of the kind of
yeah,
genre. I mean, not all of them, but
no,
generally. And Jonathan Maberry, who I love,
yeah,
great horror writer, says it's not about the monsters; it's about the people who
yeah.
win over the monsters in the end.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why Stephen King's so successful, because he's very character driven.
Mm.
And I think, my favourite horror novels are the ones where, the characters stood out to me so much. One of my favourite horror novels is World War Z, and that's almost because the zombies could be any sort of natural disaster, and it's all about the survivors and their tales and humanity getting through just a disaster that happens to be zombies. But I think it's the horror is at its strongest when it's character driven.
I love that book too, and when I saw you said that in another interview, and I think that's the book that got me into zombies, because I was like,
Yeah,
I'm not going to read zombie stuff. And actually, that book I would say is literature, in that it's actually, the
yeah,
book
yeah.
is so not the film, right? The film is
Oh,
whatever, but the
dreadful.
book it's basically alternate history, I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah,
So it's
really, really good.
probably, I mean, the fact that it has zombies in, but it's more speculative fiction. So
Yeah,
this is sort of what I want to circle back to. So does horror always have to have something supernatural in? And where does it move into crime? Where crime can be a serial killer book is often
yeah,
a crime book.
yeah.
So where do the boundaries between horror and crime and thriller and paranormal, all of those go?
Yeah, I think in the Venn diagram, the crossover for crime and horror is definitely the serial killer. And I think you've got also like at the end of the world because of global warming and stuff can sort of be horror as well. And then you've got the sci-fi spectrum. So I think a lot of genres are interlinked. I think the only pure horror probably is supernatural, because that really only exists in horror or possibly fantasy. But all other types of horror, They're just drawn from, the scariness of humanity or Mother Nature, and I think horror is a pretty wide net, to be honest, and I think that's why there's so many subgenres in horror. I mean, if you take, crime, you've got the cozy mystery and things. I don't think there's as many subgenres as there is with horror, because it goes into post-apocalypse and joins with sci-fi, and it goes into serial killers and joins with crime. So I think it's the center of the universe. I do horror, and I think all the other genres gravitate around horror because it links with all of them.
I love that. That's brilliant. I'm I'm going to go with that. Horror is the center of the universe. But no, I do like that. And I mean, I like also what you said about being a happy person, because I'm a happy person and I read a lot of horror. I know a lot of horror writers, and I find horror writers some of the nicest people. I've said this before on the show. Well. Yeah, because I think if everyone has a dark side, dark things in their head, and horror writers can get it out on the page, and thus it's not in their head anymore. Whereas, like, if you write like rainbows and unicorns, all the dark stuff stays in your brain.
Exactly. Yeah. So no. Yeah.
It is definitely a bit like that.
I mean, yeah, I've met a lot of horror authors, and they're all great people. They're all lovely. They've all got great sense of humours.
Okay, so let's just kind of staying with writing horror then. If people are interested in writing horror, I imagine they're reading a lot of horror, but there is some horror tropes that a reader would necessarily needs to have, and also some that might have turned into cliches. So what are some of those sort of necessary tropes and cliches?
I think it's a difficult one to answer, I suppose. I always try to think what fear comes from our human needs being sort of taken from us. So we don't like being trapped or confined because we worry about suffocating. We don't, the end of the world situations with zombies and things, we fear about getting food and shelter and warmth. We don't want to be attacked and things. So you have to kind of think about what human needs you're going to take away from your survivors, because that's where the sort of the fear comes from. So being stalked in the dark woods by a slasher, you're losing your sight because you're in the dark and you're around the woods, so you're taking the sight from the character. So I think a lot of the tropes that are fundamental tends to be things about putting people in a situation where they can't fully focus on their comforts, the things that would usually keep them safe. I suppose you revert their little patch of civilization back down to caveman era, and you bring out the inner caveman fears and things. So being chased, that brings out our caveman that we need to get away as quickly as possible. Being trapped, is a primal fear. So I think the tropes that always tend to be necessary to bring out that fear in the reader, they need to be very primal, deep fears that we have. Like spiders terrify people because we have a primal fear of being bitten and poisoned and things. So the tropes tend to be very much around primal fears, I feel.
And then, like I read in one of your interviews, you said, one of the cliches that to be avoided is the young blonde woman running and then tripping over a log or something. I'd actually put, in general, the kind of young, beautiful person being murdered is a trope. I mean, it's a kind of, okay. And this is repeated. So anything else people should be kind of avoiding or being aware of? Like, I think gender tropes in horror are quite important to challenge.
Absolutely. And I mean, with my own work, people quite often praise the fact that my characters are normal people. Then they don't have any guns or training. They're not soldiers or police officers usually. I've got salesmen that get into the horrible situations and things. And there's a website called Tropes.org, I think, and I read that for every film or book I enjoy, and it'll list out all the tropes and whether they've been subverted. But I mean, whenever you can identify a trope, it's really fun to try and do the opposite. So you've got, I think Buffy the Vampire Slayer did it in the first scene of the series where they had a blonde girl running and being chased by, a lad, and then she suddenly turns into a vampire and kills him. And that was, subverting a trope that at that point had been pretty steadfast with, the slasher movies of the 80s and 90s. So Joss Whedon, subverted that trope there. So I think you should look at whatever the zeitgeist is, what's the trope today, what's happening today, and try and subvert that, and that can be really successful. And I know for a long time, zombies kind of outstayed their welcome. So the more popular ones were ones like Jonathan Mabrey. He did think, he had Patient Zero that did the zombies, but it was very much scientific rather than, the dead are rising and nobody knows why. He went the opposite direction, meant the dead are rising and this is why, it's scientific and someone's doing it, a terrorist, and he's subverted the tropes there. And I think at the moment we've got Bird Box and the one where they couldn't make a noise.
The Silent Place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like those are obviously the tropes at the moment. So if you can think of some cool way to subvert that, you'd kind of be tapping into what today's audience are looking for and then surprising them. But the tropes change all the time with every generation, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even I was thinking about the zombies because I read quite a lot of zombie fiction. Well, I didn't used to. Again, Jonathan Mabrey really got me into it. And he has like the Rotten Ruin series, which is a YA kind of crossover, which is in that. But also like Game of Thrones, has zombies in. The whites and the army of the dead, they are zombies. But yet people don't, because they don't get called that, people almost forget that they're watching zombie kind of horror.
No, and that's what you got to do, because if you're just following the same old path, then people just roll their eyes, because you'll get the most success when you do something first, and that's true in any life. Because, you look at Mark Dawson, he got the most success from Facebook ads because he's the guy that twigged on it first. And it's the same for writing within a genre. If you have the idea first, it's completely fresh and original. And there's a book called Hex, and I forget the guy's name because it's hard to pronounce. But he wrote a story about a witch that's nothing like anything I've ever read. And it's stuck in my mind so much because there's nothing it can get lost within my head, because it stands on its own as this unique story that there's nothing else like. So I can't help but think about that. Whereas with zombie films and books, they become quite interchangeable unless they have something really specific. So any horror writer out there, I think we all have the same kind of desire that, I want to write a zombie book, I want to write a haunted house book, I want to write a vampire book. Because we're fans of the genre, we want to do these things that we've enjoyed so much ourselves. But when you take that route, like I want to write a vampire novel at some point, and what's putting me off is when I do, I want it to be completely different. And I love the Strain series of books because they're so different.
Too. Yeah.
So, and I took that with when I did tackle zombies. I made sure I did some things different, and that's why I'm not going to write a vampire book until I have that idea. And I think one of the worst things, especially a horror author can do, is just go, I love zombies, so I'm going to write a zombie book, because there's so many. So you've got to think, I'm going to write a zombie book, but this is how it's completely different from every other zombie book. And with so many books available now, you kind of need to have that unique selling point, I think. If you're looking at, making money and a living, you need to have that.
So thinking about sort of how that, you mentioned Bird Box, which, has been on Netflix, the adaptation, and many of us read the book by Josh Malerman a couple of years ago now, I guess, when it came out. So, and given Stranger Things, again, Netflix, a lot of Amazon stuff coming out and films, horror stuff just being more mainstream, do you think even writing screenplays or trying to do adaptations or looking at other forms of media is a good way forward for horror? What are your thoughts around this for yourself?
I think there's going to be a bit of a renaissance with these streaming platforms that give us, just like Kindle gave us unprecedented ability to publish our books. I think, you can contact Netflix and they'll get back to you. You can't contact MGM and hope to have someone get back to you. I've got a friend, Matt Shaw, who's been dealing with Netflix about having a small indie film he made put on there, and they're receptive to it. And with Amazon, because you've got Thomas and Mercer and 47 North, because there's a good route now where you can start out on publishing your own books on Kindle and try and kill it with sales, so much so that Amazon take notice and then get you onto one of their imprints. And then if that does really well, they're already set up to do an Amazon Prime show based on one of the books. So there's a direct route now for Joe Blogs to write a book and someday get onto Amazon Prime or Netflix, because it's all kind of being streamlined around sort of it's very much between the viewer now and the creator, with a lot less in the middle, which is great.
Mm.
And booksellers would say the opposite, that it's not great, and agents and all that would say it's not great. But for us, the creators, it is, because there's less resistance now to get to that end point. I wrote a horror script for Audible to make a standalone sort of horror play, and I wrote that. They paid me for it, and I haven't heard anything since. But it happened. They got in touch with me. I'm not with an agent or a big, publishing deal, but Audible came to me and said, look, I'd really like you to write some horror for our platform exclusively. That happened, and I've had a board game manufacturer contact me to make a board game. And if you concentrate now on just selling your book, everything else kind of falls in around you, and that's great, because there's less to worry about, and you can only focus on what you can do. So you don't have to worry about trying to get an agent and trying to win the lottery of getting that, and then hope that agent can get into. Like, there's a lot less just hoping on this happening and hoping on that happening. You write your books, you try and sell them as good as you can, and that success will breed success, and you look at Mark Dawson. I know he's got all sorts of things in the pipeline, but it all began with him finding out how to sell his own books. So my advice for authors is always concentrate on that, and the rest will come. The best way to get a film deal or a book deal is to sell 1 million ebooks, and you have control over that. You can change that, but you can't make a Hollywood executive take note of you. That's not something you can just go out and do.
It's funny. I mean, I have obviously looked at the way you're doing things, and I admire you very much. And actually, similar to Mark Dawson, you're very focused, which is fantastic. And I have a different brain, which is I'm kind of I'm interested in so many things, and I do so many different things, and I don't focus. Now, some people would say, that is just a fundamental difference in personality. And I like having a wide base because it feels more stable to me. But how you're doing things, obviously you're very successful. You never went back to the day job, right? Basically.
No, 7 years now, going on 8 years. I've never worked for anyone else. It's amazing.
So basically, similar time to me. So tell us, how are you running things right now? How are you managing to make a good full-time living, supporting your family in beginning of 2019 as we record this?
Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons I am so focused. There was a point, and I think, I suppose when I think of things as a business, this is actually something that happens to a lot of businesses that start to get success. I suddenly branched out in 100 directions, thinking that was what I needed to do. Diversify, don't get all my income from Amazon. So I set up an online course. I was going to try and sell products and T-shirts. And I started to do all that, and they were all making little bits of income. But slowly my sanity just started slipping, and I was depressed. And I had the online course, but I didn't feel right trying to get hundreds of pounds out of fellow authors, because I kind of have an overactive cringe gland, and and what I really love about selling books is that it's so passive. Suddenly I was in this direct sales atmosphere, and that was making me feel really depressed, and I felt guilty, like I was charging people for something that wasn't worth the money, and all these things. And I'm a pretty anxious person and a deep thinker, and it wasn't making me happy. So I decided I'm going to draw it back down to books. I'm going to focus on the one thing that I am good at and that I enjoy. And my wife just recently left her job. She was an MD of a company, but she was working every hour God sent, and missing out on our kids. And I was kind of becoming a main breadwinner / at-home daddy as well. So I was getting stressed and overworked. So my wife now is come home, and we're going to try and build the business together now, and do some of those things I wanted to do. But I was a bit overwhelmed, and she's very much a stronger person than me emotionally, that you can put the weight of the world on her, and she'll come out smelling of roses, whereas I will crumple. So it's really good to now have her kind of at home with me to deal with those things. But from what I do personally to stay afloat and do well, first thing is I haven't panicked over the last 7 years. The first time Kindle Unlimited came along and used to pay you per download rather than length and all things like that, destroyed me, wiped out half my sales almost overnight. And suddenly, there was these guys with 100 short stories were making more than me, who'd written 15 full-length novels that I tried to take very seriously. So that ruined me almost, and made me panic and think, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I reacted to the environment. I wrote a load of short stories, put them together in a compendium, released them separately, started to take advantage of the new model. That got my earnings up a bit more, but I concentrated on doing the right thing. So I concentrated on getting people onto my mailing list and just kind of steadying the ship a bit. And I didn't think short term. I just kept going, doing the right things. And those people that suddenly had this boom with Kindle Unlimited taking advantage of it, they're getting day jobs again now. And I feel really bad for them. But it's quite a few of my colleagues who started in 2011 or thereabouts that did really well. You know, they spent all their money, posted it all over Facebook. They're doing all this, that, and the other, you know, and just kept writing books and not thinking about anything else, just thinking it'll always be this way, and it won't. It's going to get harder. It's going to get easier. Wages go up, wages go down, and that's business. You have to. I'm always reading things you've written, David Goughran's written, Mark's written. You know, I take online courses, and I always make sure I know what's declining and what's on the rise, and I try to dabble in them all to see what's helping. And I never stay static, and you can't. If I just sat and wrote books and kept releasing them like I did in 2011, I'd be back at a day job, because it takes a lot more than that now. And I think, to give a few tips people can take away, you gotta have that reader magnet on your website and people signing up to your mailing list. It's just fundamental, and that's what gives you the stability. If Amazon stops selling books tomorrow, I know I've got 20,000 people I can try and migrate somewhere else. You've got to have that little bit of control, because that gives you the stability for when times are down, so that you can make hay sometimes when things are good, but you need a cushion to keep a baseline, and that's what a mailing list will do for you. It will keep you at that level of never being completely out of ideas and never having zero sales. So that's fundamental. As soon as you've got 2 books, start giving away book 1 for free, and selling them book 2. And that I give away 5 free books because I'm in a position I can do that. But it pays for itself, and it always will do. And it's, although I hate to say it, at the moment advertising, it's the difference maker. I was doing pretty well. I was earning between 3 and 5 grand a month in pounds, which is a good living. Once I started getting the ads working for me, I 20 grand of sales some months and things. It completely took me from plodding along to, wow, this has changed my life on a whole new level. So, I mean, to get established and to kind of stay afloat, the mailing list will probably be enough if you're doing everything right and you're writing good books and you're writing them quick enough and you're releasing them to a mailing list. You can probably plod along like that. But if you really want to, make a name for yourself, even at a low level, you kind of need to dabble with the ads, I think, because it's the way the industry's going, and it's because it's becoming like any other business. You got to, fight for that visibility.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I agree with all of that. Do you think also that, have you focused down on specific subgenres and you're kind of writing to an audience?
Yeah, and again, that's kind of, financial security does come from sticking in the same genre. I wrote, probably a dozen horror novels, and then I released an action thriller, and it just died a death. No one was interested, and it was like starting again. So it is easy if you stick to one genre, because you can keep building within that genre. But then, as an author, we are, I suppose, artists, and we do need to flex our muscles sometimes and write something different. So you can do that. Just be prepared that it's almost like starting again. So make sure you're in a position where, okay, money's quite good, sales quite good. I can probably afford to take a hit for a few months by building up, some new books. And my Sarah Stone thrillers languished for a long time, doing absolutely nothing until I started advertising them, and now they make a lot of money. And that completely changed from no sales whatsoever to being really popular. And that was 100% advertising, because it just wasn't happening without the Facebook ads. But with my horror novels, I can sell them without ads, because I've got, 20,000 horror fans on my mailing list. And if I tried to sell them a romance book, not a single one would buy it. So you need to kind of, if you are going to go multi-genre, you need to almost run separate businesses. So you can't have a mailing list that's going to do every genre. You'd have to set up, history fiction and romance and horror, and for each one, run it as a separate business, maybe have a different pen name, because you can't just flog everything to the same audience. You need to sell them what they want from you.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I have 2. Although within JF Penn, I do write a number of subgenres. So it's kind of difficult. I might end up having different lists with different subgenres. But you've mentioned Facebook ads and Amazon ads. So are you using both right now, or either?
Facebook ads, since probably 12 months ago, last January, I started again. I tried originally when Mark first released his course. I took it, and the sign-ups to my mailing list worked straight away. and they always have done. So I can add subscribers between 30 and 50 pence, and with a catalogue of 20 odd books, that is worth doing. It makes me money. So that worked from day one, but I could not get any traction on paid sales. So if I advertised the box set and tried to sell it there and then, it was losing me money. So I gave that up for probably 18 months. I just didn't touch it. And then for some reason, I can't even remember what it was now. I think sales were a bit down. I knew my wife was unhappy in her job, so she didn't want to be there anymore. And that was a big wage. She wanted to give up. So maybe I got a bit desperate again. And I think a lot of my success comes when I'm really desperate and down. And that's when I kind of come out the gates fighting. So I spent a load of money on Facebook ads, but this time I targeted people with the caveat that they had to own a Kindle. So I targeted Stephen King fans, but narrowed it to only Kindle owners. And suddenly I did a 10 grand month out of nowhere. Having the previous month, I did about 3.5. It had been a pretty bad month. I know 3.5, is a lot of money for most people that want to write. But for me, that was kind of at the low end of what I was earning. So that wasn't great. And then suddenly I did about 10 grand's worth of sales. And most of that was profit. I'd only spent about 2 grand to get that boost. So I was like, whoa, what just happened there? So then next month I ran even more ads, and I went over 20 grand in sales, and I kept doing that, and made stupid amounts. I've made more in the last 12 months than I ever have done in the last 7, and that was because for me the Facebook ads suddenly just clicked, and I just kept. I spent all the money I had on my business credit card and things, and just spent whatever capital I had, and that was what stopped me from spending more. I had no more money to spend, and I got all that back, plus a return on investment. And then things started to die down a bit. So I think what I learned is you can't get those gains forever. So you can definitely get that for a bit, but don't think that's going to. I can't keep doing 20 grand months, unfortunately. But I've now got to a point where, I am boosting my sales to a really good level and keeping them there. And I think that's what advertising will do for you, slip away into obscurity. So I'm spending probably 5-6 grand a month on Facebook at the moment and making about, 15 to 20 in sales. So it's a really good living. Amazon ads, I'm really struggling with. I've had a recommendation of an agency from a pretty big author who's doing really well, and they're going to start managing my AMS ads in April and doing it all for me for a fee. So I'm going to test that for a few months and see whether they manage to pay for themselves. So I don't usually outsource things. I usually like to do them myself, but I just can't seem to get anything to happen with AMS. So I'm going to outsource that. But Facebook ads, the better you can get at that, the better. Because even if you're only spending, $5 a day, you can make a profit on that and then just scale it up. So there's a pretty low entry point to get into it. And then if you do get better at it, because of the returns you're making, you can scale it up. Kind of, it pays for itself to scale up if you're doing it right. But it's just hard to get that initial success. It took me 18 months to finally get that working. So it's a skill in itself.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And just for everyone listening, just because Facebook ads work for you doesn't mean they're going to work for someone else, and vice versa.
Don't spend a load of money.
Yeah, and also Amazon ads work for some people, don't work for other people.
Absolutely.
It's so interesting. So, and I think, again, you mentioned there, like things, it's almost like something changes in your life, like your sales drop, or you have a family situation, and then you really push, and you're like pushing, and then you're like, what's the latest thing? And you're getting into that, and then you realize that that's going to drop off. And this is so important, and this is why you're in it for the long term, and you have a mature business like me. So this works now, let's take advantage of it. It's stopped working, move, maybe do something else. So nothing ever continues to work in the same way, right?
Nothing. No, absolutely. There's a few things that I suppose you'd call them evergreen, and that's things like your mailing list, writing good books, having good covers, good blurbs. Those things don't change, so be good at those. Don't skimp on editing and artwork and things. But there's always fads that are working. And that's where you need to, if you were investing in stocks in London, you'd be reading the Financial Times and all the broadsheets and things, and you'd be reading business magazine, constantly immersing yourself in that world. And that's kind of what you have to do to take it beyond a hobby. You can't just write books and put them on KDP. You need to know what Mark Dawson's doing, Hugh Howey, all the guys were really good at learning this stuff. And you also need to try and find the things yourself as well by, doing your own little testing. But, you can't be static. You need to know where the market is, where it's going, and just try new things. Because, like I say, if you can twig on something first, you'll get the biggest gains. Like, you know, Mark Dawson, and some of the early self-publishers that found the success when ebooks were, you know, first a thing. So always try new things yourself as well. But you want to look at the juggernauts and see what's working for them, because, you know, it will usually work for you if you get in there early enough.
Absolutely. Okay, last question before we finish up. So I wanted to ask you about the Horror Writers Association. So we're both members of that, and they've just released a long list for the Bram Stoker Award, and I find it really interesting that I feel like there's two things. One, I feel they're really open to indies, and on the other hand, I see mostly traditionally published authors in things like awards lists. So this is kind of a broader question. It doesn't need to be specifically HWA, but how open do you think associations are, like professional ones at that level, to indies? And would you ever consider a traditional publishing deal in order to get into that type of prize area?
To be honest, I think they're all going to die a death and be replaced by, you know, more forward-thinking ones. I've been a member of the HWA for 5 years. They accepted me as an active member because I earned $2,000 from an actual publisher, and that's about all they ever wrote me with a book that was with them. And I brought the rights back off them eventually, and then earned 10 times more on my own. But what got me into the HWA as an active member was the fact they'd written me a check. So that legitimised me more to them that somebody else had written me a check than I actually went out and sold thousands of books on my own.
They have changed that, because I got in as an indie.
Oh, right, okay. So, I mean, back when, I don't know what it is now because I joined so long ago, but I'm a member, but the interaction I've had, you know, is pretty much zero. It's kind of in name only with me. And that's as much my fault as theirs. I don't really get involved because, I mean, I don't know. I'm not big on vanity. I don't really care about awards. I don't care about, you know, being lauded as anything but someone that entertains people and gives, you know, £3 worth of value with a book or whatever. What matters to me is, you know, the house my family live in, and how much time I get to spend with them, and, you know, the lives, you know, my family live based off what I do, which isn't just monetary. It's the fact that I'm at home all the time. I get to make my own hours and things like those are the things that matter to me. And like a business, you know, I want to make as much money as possible. So I don't really think about winning awards, but I think a lot of them, not saying the HWA specifically, but they're just old boys clubs full of snobs that think they're better than, you know, everybody else. And I don't really think they serve that much of a purpose. Like, the HWA has never done anything to fight the cause for me, and I've never really done anything for them, and I've kind of got their membership, you know, that kind of almost legitimizes me in some way. And to be honest, early on, that's kind of why I tried to get it, because I thought less of myself as an indie author. And I suppose now I've got the ego where I've sold more books than most traditionally published authors, especially in the horror genre, that I kind of just think, well, I don't want anything to do with traditional publishers, because I've been down to London several times to meet with, you know, agents, or I've been down to meet Audible and ACX and things, and, you know, the only ones that ever really have my interest are the ones that want to work with creators, and they don't care, you know, whether there's an agent in between or not. And, you know, when Audible brought me down to see them, you know, they didn't care about any of that, and that's why Amazon you know, they're the ones that are doing so well, while, you know, proper publishers, as they'd call themselves, you know, they're struggling. And that's why I think, you know, there's the Alliance of Independent Author actually tries to be a resource and, you know, fight causes and things, whereas these awards ceremony, you know, they're all, you know, nepotistic and things, and I don't really care, to be honest.
Oh, I love it.
You've asked me about something I don't really have much of an opinion on, I'll be honest.
Well, no, that is an opinion. That is a very valid opinion, because I do think that so much of the of what happens in your indie life is about the definition of success. Because if your definition of success is to get an agent and a publisher and a prize,
and be broke.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like, if you want to make mouldy six figures, you know, or you
Yeah.
know, six-figure plus living, then you're doing that, and
Yeah.
I'm doing that, and neither of us have those things.
No.
So I think that that is a totally valid point, and I really appreciate that. So tell people where they can find you and your books online, and also you have a non-fiction book too. So mention that as well.
Uh, yeah, I did. Sal, where's that Diary of a Flummoxed Father? I thought it was in the kitchen. I do. I've just written my first non-fiction book, and it's all about my experiences of having my first child, Jack. It's tongue-in-cheek comedy. It's a bit sort of Dave Gorman-esque in its tone. So that was really fun. Didn't sell a lot of copies. Didn't think it would. It was more for me, and that's again another great gift of what I do is that I've written something that when I'm dead and buried, my son will have this book that tells him all about how I felt about him, and there's so many parts of this job that aren't to do with money, and you couldn't ask for a better family job. You know, it's I was the only bloke there today at Slimming World when I went with my wife because we're losing weight. You know, and all the other blokes are at work, and you know, I'm with my wife, and I've dropped my kids off somewhere, and it's wonderful. If you do want to buy my books, I'd say probably start with The Gates, which is my most popular series. There's 4 books in that at the moment. Search Iain Rob Wright on Amazon. I'm generally exclusive to Amazon, unfortunately. But if you go on my website, iainrobwright.com, you can get 5 of my books for free, and that's on any device. So if you on iTunes usually for your books and things, you can put them on there. And here's my first non-fiction book. It's a draft copy, so there's a band across the top, but ignore that. That's me and my son Jack. It's a funny read, hopefully, anyway. And it's probably the book I've had the most enjoyment writing. And again, what other job gives you the option to just try something completely different for a bit of fun?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Ian. That was great.
Thanks, Joanna.